Good morning, my dear friends. Welcome back to our Wednesday morning weekly Tanya Shir. We are studying the 8th chapter, Perek Ches of Tanya. If you have the lessons in Tanya, we are up to page 129 in the new print, which would be 127, I believe, in the old print. So just to refresh your memory here, we're talking about, the Alter Rebbe is explaining that when it comes to the forces of darkness and the forces of evil and negativity, also known as klipa, there are two types. There is what's called klipas noiga and what's called sholosh klipos hatmeyos, and discussed a couple of differences between them. One of the main, most important differences between them is that when it comes to klipas noiga, this is a more mild version of darkness, a more mild version of evil, if you will, an evil that still has within it some light, or at least it always retains the potential to be elevated to kedusha, to be elevated to holiness. So even something, an experience or something like that has descended to the realm of klipas noiga, it has the ability relatively easily to be elevated to kedusha, as opposed to sholosh klipos hatmeyos, the lower level, the lower realm of negativity, where in general the rule is once something descends to sholosh klipos, once something descends over there, it is impossible or almost impossible or very difficult at least to elevate it back to kedusha. It's considered bound. It's considered locked in to the realm of impurity, basically until the coming of Mashiach, at which point when Mashiach comes, all negativity and all darkness and all evil will be eradicated from the world. Until that point, anything that descends into the realm of sholosh klipos hatmeyos is basically stuck there. Unless there is, in chapter 7, Perek Zayin, it was discussed that there are higher levels of kedusha, what the Alter called tshuva gdola kol kach, such an incredibly high level of kedusha, that can remove the energy even from sholosh klipos hatmeyos. But otherwise, as a rule, once it goes into sholosh klipos hatmeyos, even tshuva nechona, even regular tshuva, even a good tshuva, is not effective to remove something from the realm of sholosh klipos hatmeyos. The Alter Rebbe added that in general, this is the difference between when we say something is forbidden and when we say something is permissible. When we say something is forbidden, we use the term osur. Osur means forbidden. Osur also means tied. Something is tied down. When we say something is permissible, we refer to it as being mutter. Mutter means permissible. Mutter also means that it's not tied, that it's released. And the reason why we use these terms from a spiritual perspective is because when we say something is forbidden, we don't just mean that it's forbidden, we mean that it's tied, it's held down, it's knotted into the realm of darkness and negativity, and it cannot be taken out again under normal circumstances. Save the coming of Mashiach, save a tshuva gdola kol kach, it cannot be taken out. Whereas with those things which are permissible, doesn't necessarily mean just because it's permissible doesn't mean it's holy. In fact, it's not holy unless it's being done explicitly for the sake of serving Hashem, for the sake of living a life in the type of which Hashem wants us to live, put us here to live, etc. But nevertheless, if it's not something which is forbidden, then although, if it's not for the sake of serving Hashem, although it is still in the realm of klipa, but it's mutter, it's untied, meaning that relatively easily a person can then turn around and elevate it back to kedusha, transform it back to kedusha, do even a regular level of tshuva. This will help to extract the chayas, to extract the energy, to elevate it to kedusha. This is what was explained in generally speaking until here that we've learned. And again, the distinction is made between those things which are halachically forbidden, right? Food which is forbidden, activities which are forbidden, words which are forbidden, thoughts which are forbidden, etc., etc. And then the distinction is made between those things and things which are permissible, right? So permissible is things that a Jew is allowed to eat, things that a Jew is allowed to say. There's no explicit prohibition, right? There's no explicit prohibition in saying certain things, in doing certain things, in thinking certain things. They're not explicitly forbidden. And yet, if they're not clearly, explicitly for the sake of serving Hashem, then they also belong. They also exist in the realm of klipa, just not sholosh klipas atmeis, but klipas noga. Okay, this is what was explained, generally speaking, in Perek Zayin. Okay, now Perek Ches, which we're learning. So began with the Alter Rebbe adding that when it comes to non-kosher, when it comes to food that is forbidden to eat, so there is something, and there's an additional element to it. The additional element to it is that the food itself it's a physical existence. It's a physical manifestation of something that is forbidden for a Jew to consume, and therefore, even if a Jew were to consume it without any intent of doing a sin, even if a Jew were to consume it without any awareness, without any intent to sin, without any awareness that they were doing a sin, not just without any awareness of doing a sin, but they did it l'shem shamayim. They thought they were doing a mitzvah. They consumed the food with the intention of using it to serve Hashem. They ate it completely l'shem shamayim, and they had no idea that there was something wrong with this food. Not only did they eat it with the intent of serving Hashem, but they actually used the energy that they derived from this non-kosher food. They actually used it to serve Hashem, and they studied, and they prayed, and they helped a fellow Jew, and they lived the life that a Jew is supposed to live after having derived the energy from this forbidden food. Says the Alter Rebbe, nevertheless, there's sort of a factual element here, which is the fact is that the food itself is trapped in the realm of klipa, as was mentioned before, and therefore, with the best of intentions and without any intent to sin, and even actually using the energy of this food to serve Hashem, it's not going to be able to release, to exonerate the food from the shalosh klipas atmeis. In other words, in this case, the person sinned without knowledge, right? Without awareness of it, and yet, nevertheless, because the actual food itself, the physical existence of the food, is connected in a spiritual sense to shalosh klipas atmeis. So this is not something that the person can manipulate through their intention, and so this is an additional element that you have with food. In other words, if it's not an actual physical food, if it's something that a person does, an activity that a person does, a person sinned, they sinned by mistake, but they didn't realize they were sinning. So that's different because it's not an actual physical existence. Okay. After that, the Alter Rebbe added this point. The Alter Rebbe added, this is where we got up to last time, if I remember correctly, before Pesach, it was a couple of weeks ago. The Alter Rebbe added that based on this idea, this difference between shalosh klipas atmeis and klipas noga, this combined with another idea that we explained before in the beginning of Tanya, Perek Aleph, that the difference between the Yetzer, the nefesh abamis of a Yid, and the nefesh abamis of a Goy, is that the nefesh abamis of a Yid comes from klipas noga, and the nefesh abamis of a Goy comes from shalosh klipas atmeis. Says the Rebbe, if that's the case, then temptation to commit to do something which is in the realm of shalosh klipas atmeis, even the temptation to do a sin which is explicitly forbidden by the Torah, even the temptation itself, we call it shed mished nuchroin, which means we call it a goyish Yetzer Hora. A Yidishe Yetzer Hora doesn't even desire, because it itself comes from klipas noga, it itself doesn't even desire to do something that is explicitly against the will of Hashem. To do something that is permitted, not l'shem shamayim, that's a Yetzer Hora, but it's a Yidishe Yetzer Hora because it's in the realm of klipas noga. But to do something that's taka, that violates, that goes against the will of Hashem, this taka, even by a Yid, even the temptation to do such a thing doesn't exist. If a Jew were to be if we were to live lives that were true to our identity, not just we wouldn't sin, this is what Alter Rebbe says, it's a little bit shocking, but this is what it says. Not just we wouldn't sin, but by virtue of being, by having even a nefesh habamis from klipas noiga, we wouldn't even be tempted. You have no such temptation, right? Like you'd say, lahavdil, there are human temptations, right? There are human, just by virtue of being human, the human temptations. To conduct oneself in ways that human beings should not conduct themselves in, but at least they're tempted to. And then you say, well, there are certain things that animals do, right? That healthy human beings are not even tempted. Animals roll around in the mud without clothing. Animals, animals conduct themselves the way animals, they eat off the floor, they live in filth, a healthy human being, this is that famous story of Reb Nachman of Breslov, right, where the prince becomes ill, and his illness is that he thinks that he's a chicken. It's a very famous mashal Reb Nachman of Breslov said. And the prince removes his clothing, and he goes on the table, and he refuses to eat, and he eat properly, and refuses to speak, and he refuses to use the restroom, and he's just, quacking and squawking like a duck, and he's under the table, and nobody knows what to do until a great professor comes and pretends he's also like a chicken, and heals the king, and he heals the prince. But the point I want for now is that this is an illness. There's a Hasidic story that they tell about a man who comes to a Hasidic Rebbe, and he says, Rebbe, my son, it's a very famous story told over different ways, but the point is the same. He says, Rebbe, in Yiddish he says, Rebbe, mein Sohn is in ganzen Beshuggah. My son has gone completely mad. Completely mad. What happened? He says, Rebbe, I can't even, it's difficult for me to even get the words out of my mouth, but tanzt mit Shiksis und esst Chazeren. He's dancing with non-Jewish women and he's eating pork. For a young Jewish man to dance with non-Jewish women and to eat pork, he's in ganzen Meshuggah. He lost his mind. Tanzt mit Shiksis und esst Chazeren. So legend has it, the Hasidic Rebbe smiled and said, you're telling me your son is completely crazy, and you're telling me that he dances with non-Jewish women and eats pork. He says, I don't see anything crazy about that at all. He said, if you told me that he was eating non-Jewish women and dancing with pork, yeah, then he would be crazy. But if he's dancing with the women and eating the pork, that's not crazy. That's very normal, right? He was trying to say, that's the story. In other words, he was trying to say, don't conflate the issues. Your son has spiritual challenges. Your son has, he's tempted by all sorts of things. Beseder, it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with correctly, and there's a way. But don't conflate the issues. Don't tell me your son is crazy. If he was rolling around in the mud, dancing with pigs and eating non-Jewish women, yeah, then we would be the person who lost their mind. But it's not the type of activity that a person does when they lose their minds. So I'm trying to say is even temptation, right? The Rambam writes very famously that something a little scary actually. The Rambam writes that unhealthy people, physically unhealthy people, part of the illness at times, don't forget the Rambam was a doctor, right? So part of the illness is that they crave food that's unhealthy for them. And they despise food that is healthy for them. To the extent that when they take healthy food that would heal, that would nourish them, that would heal them physically, and they put it in their mouths, it tastes repulsive to them. Choylei aguf, the Rambam says, those physically ill, toyamim hamar mosek v'hamosek mar, which means those things that are good for them, it's hard for them to eat it. It tastes disgusting. The body rejects it. The body needs it desperately. But somehow, because of the illness, the body is not communicating with itself properly. So the taste buds are telling the brain, this is not good. This is ugh, get rid of it. And hafuch, and the food that is very dangerous for the body, when it puts it into its mouth, it tastes delicious, right? The person who struggles with high sugar will know this. The sugar can be mamash poison for the system. Push it, killing us. And when we put it in our mouth, it tastes sweet. The body goes, delicious. Poison. It's a choyle aguf. This is a physical ailment and a very serious one. So the Rambam says the same is true in a spiritual sense with choyle nefesh. Choyle nefesh, which means those who have spiritual illnesses in their soul. So the wisdom that would heal them, and the lifestyle habits that would heal them, and the material that they need to learn and absorb, and the people that they need to hang around, who would be able to heal them because of the illness of their soul, they reject it. Right? People who go through life, this is true psychologically, the Rambam's talking about spiritually, but it's true psychologically as well. But people who go through life bitter and cynical and angry, sarcastic, right? They need to heal them. They need to spend time with people who are wise and deep and kind. And yet because they're cynical, they mock these type of people. They come across, they feel like they're shallow and ineffective and bleh. But it's beneath, they feel like it's beneath them to spend time with such simple people, and they're not simple. They're incredibly profound and kind, and being around them would heal them. They reject them. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this it's an incredibly important point. The Alter Rebbe is saying a person can be tempted to think, this is going to become quite a theme later on in the Tanya, when the Alter Rebbe will talk about what is a tzaddik, right? A person is tempted to think, if I'm tempted by something, but I can control myself, I can withstand the temptation, then I'm good, right? I'm tempted to talk Lashon Hora, right? But I can control myself, so I'm good. And I'm not talking Lashon Hora. I'm not gossiping, I'm not... But say that, in a practical sense, you're good, you're safe. Right? If you have the self-discipline, you control yourself, you're fine, you're great. Says the Alter Rebbe, but do you ever stop to think that the fact that you even want this is not healthy? What do you mean? But I'm controlling myself. Yeah, but there's certain things that are so repulsive to us that we don't even want it. True. A Yid, a Jew by nature, truth, because of his makeup, even his nefesh habamis, even his Yetzer Hora, comes from klipas noiga. V'lochein, says the Alter Rebbe, I'm going back a couple lines. V'lochein gama Yetzer Hora, v'koyach hamis'avel dvorim u'asurim, even the temptation for forbidden things, for shalosh klipas et meis, who shade m'shadin nechroyes, agets Yetzer Hora of a goy. Wie kommt es zu a Yid? How does the Yid have such a by right? In essence, the Jew shouldn't even be tempted to this in the first place. For permissible things. That, yes, that the Jew can have. And again, not that the Jew should give in to that, that's also klipa. But at least it's klipas noiga, so that it makes sense that the Jew has a temptation to. All right, this is where we're holding here in Tanya. If I remember correctly, I added last time that the Rebbe actually explains. So the Rebbe explains. So if a Jew is nefesh, so how does the taka happen? So why are we tempted to talk Lashon Hora or to do things that are explicitly forbidden in the Torah if we all have Yetzer Horas that come from klipas noiga? So where does the temptation come from b'chlal for a Yid to want dvarim asurim? Where does that even come from? So the Rebbe, if I remember correctly, we learned this last time. The Rebbe says that this comes from an overindulgence in dvarim hamutorim. That when a Jew, in other words, because Hashem made us in such a way that we're never stagnant, right? There's always progress, there's always movement. So if the movement is not in a positive direction, if we're not climbing higher in spirituality and holiness, then by nature we become more perverted. We denigrate. We become lower. So if the Yid is not going to fight, with their own Yidishe nefesh habamis sufficiently, the Yidishe nefesh habamis which only wants to do dvarim hamutorim, but not l'shem shemayim, not for the sake of serving Hashem, klipas noiga. If you don't wrestle with it sufficiently over there, then with time, as one marinates, as one sits in the dvarim hamutorim and the klipas noiga, eventually one comes to be tempted, you become weaker. right? It's like saying, a person is born healthy, so how do they become so ill? Well, the answer is bit by bit, right? Slowly, step by step. You one bad habit and another bad habit. I believe the previous Rebbe once wrote or said that it never happened in all of human history that a person goes to sleep at night in their bed, in their home, and wakes up in the middle of the night lost in the forest. Nobody wakes up in the middle of the night lost in the forest. I believe the Frierdiker Rebbe said that. Meaning what? What's it trying to say? Yeah, there are people who get lost in the forest, but there are many. Getting lost in the forest, again, back in the day, alone, without a compass and without resources, without anything, that's the culmination of a series of many wrong decisions that led you further and further and further astray until you end up God knows where. There were many points along the way where the person could have said, you know what, I don't feel like this is going well, and change course and stay in a safe neighborhood. So the same is true in a ruchniistic sense. An overindulgence in klipas noiga slowly but surely causes the person to lose their spiritual sensitivity to the point that a Yid can end up, Rahman al-Islam, tempted by Shalosh Klipas Hatmeis, until it can get to a stage where a Jew can even, Rahman al-Islam, end up violating something in the realm of Shalosh Klipas Hatmeis. Okay, this is where we got up to. I'm going to read a couple of lines inside, and we'll continue as we do. Again, in the new Prince on page 129 or 127. Ach mikol mokoim, says the Alter Rebbe, however, I don't want you to think. I don't want you, says the Alter Rebbe, to draw the conclusion from this that klipas noiga is not a problem. Yeah, as long as you remain in the realm of klipas noiga, you'll be fine. I don't want you to draw that conclusion, says the Alter Rebbe. Klipas noiga, it's true, a person can do teshuvah and do teshuvah relatively easily and turn and come back from klipas noiga, but don't think that it doesn't have an impact. Says Alter Rebbe, klipas noiga is also not something to be scoffed at, and therefore a person should really, Alter Rebbe is encouraging us to the motivational speakers in the Goyishe Welt lahavdil, they like to say that there's two types of pain in this world. There is the pain of discipline, right? A person who is disciplined, a person who, lives a life of discipline, does what they're supposed to do. There's a certain element of pain. You have to stick to a schedule, and you have to do things over and over again. You have to do things even when you're not in the mood, and you have to be prepared to fail. It says the pain of discipline. And then they say there's the pain of regret. The pain of regret. Which means what? Which means if you don't live a life which is self-disciplined, then in the end you look back and you have regret. So they like to say pain is not avoidable. Everybody experiences pain. The question is just which one. If you put yourself through the discipline, if you hold yourself accountable, so the discipline is painful, but then in the end you don't have to deal with the pain of regret. You don't look back and go, if only I would have been a mensch, if only I would have. You don't have to do it because you actually did. Or you let yourself, go, do whatever you want. You don't have to deal with the pain of self-discipline, but in the end you have terrible pain of regret. You give out. So in a spiritual sense, what Alter Rebbe is saying here is like this. What Alter Rebbe is saying is, by virtue of us being born and put into this world and given a Yetzer and Nefesh Abamis, we cannot avoid the struggle, the battle of life, the battle of the grind, the battle of every day, battling. The greatest of battles is the one we fight internally. The Mishnah says. The definition in the end of strength is to be able to keep oneself in check. This is Alter Rebbe saying this is not avoidable. This is not avoidable. We just get to choose. We get to choose the turf where this war is being battled, right? Because if you don't fight in Lebanon, if you don't fight in Gaza, lahavdil, then you end up fighting in your backyard, right? You can choose. You can choose the address. You can choose the location, but you can't choose whether or not to battle. So they're saying, make no mistake. Don't think you can study this and go, oh, Klipas Noiga is no big deal. Okay, we'll let it go. No. It doesn't work that way. Even the Klipas Noiga also has an impact and is also should not be taken lightly because of the heaviness of it. There's a mashal for this idea that they used to give an old Jewish mashal about a Yid who goes to buy a siddur to daven from. Once upon a time, books were very expensive, and books b'chlal were very rare. We're losing today our appreciation for books, because there's Baruch Hashem so many of them, and now you have everything Baruch Hashem online, right? So other than Shabbos and Yom Tov during the week, you can find everything without having books. But once upon a time, by that I mean 15 minutes ago, books were a very big deal, and they didn't have so many of them, and not more than 100 years ago, the large significant amounts of resources, of energy and money would go into printing books and Sfarim and Sidurim and Chumoshim, Poshet v'Yidin. Many Yidden couldn't read, Anyway, so they tell the story about the Jew who goes to buy a siddur. So he goes to buy a siddur, or he goes to get a siddur, and in those days they made, but in those days they had basically two types of siddurim. One was siddurim, you'd have siddur tfilas kol hashana. In one book, you'd have the davening for the whole year. Shabbos, Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh, Tu B'Shvat, everything. The other one, and those were relatively smaller siddurim. The other ones were big, thick, heavy siddurim. And they had basically just a little bit of davening in the middle of the page, and all around it they had printed commentary. Halachic commentary, Kabbalistic commentary in the davening. Tremendous amount of commentary. So the Jew goes to buy a siddur, or to get one, and the guy, they offer him a simple siddur, it's the siddur with the davening. He says, no, I want the siddur with commentary. Siddur with commentary, first of all, it's big. Second of all, it's chunky. It's incredibly expensive. Just a couple of words of davening in the middle of the page, 90% of it is commentary. And they take a look at the Jew and they go, Jew, you're a really simple guy. You don't understand the commentary. What do you need the commentary for? It's expensive, and what are you going to do with it? So the Jew goes, you're telling me I don't understand the commentary? I can't even read the commentary. I can barely read the davening. No, so what do you need it for? This is the way Jews used to express an idea. So the Jew goes, listen, these kinds of siddurim, I can't afford to buy them, often. I buy them once every 50 years, 60 years. He said, this siddur needs to last me for a long time. He says, I noticed with wear and tear on books, as you use them, as you turn the pages start to tear. And you have to be careful with them, but as careful as you are, eventually with wear and tear, the pages tear. What happens when the pages tear? The tear starts from the outside of the page, and it goes deeper and deeper inside. So the Jew goes, if you give me a page that's all davening, as soon as the page starts to tear, I'm not going to be able to use it anymore. In a couple of years, it will be finished. He said, that's why I want to buy a siddur with commentary, as much commentary as possible. Let the words of davening in the middle of the page be give me as much commentary. Why? I need the commentary. I understand one word of the commentary. So I need the commentary. I need the commentary should be there so when the page tears, the commentary should tear, and not the actual text of the siddur. This way, the siddur can last I can use the siddur for davening for much longer. It sounds silly, but the Jews saw in it the tremendous depth. But they said, well, the tearing represents the struggle, the wear and tear of life. In life, there's wear and tear. No, so what? So now the question is, what kind of siddur are you using? In other words, what kind of standards do you have? If you set the standards at 100 and you struggle, so sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, right? You'll battle between 95 and 100. But if you go, well, if I only need 95, right? 95 is good enough for me, so why not just set the standard at 95? Because then 95 becomes the struggle. And you end up at 90. Well, you could end up at 90. Or on a bad day, you could end up lower than that. And so it goes, they say, keep your feet firmly planted on the ground and aim for the stars. the idea that the Eibishter gave us a nefesh elokis and a nefesh abamis, and that there is this constant raging battle in between, just means that no matter where, it's like disciplining a right? Dealing with the Yetzer is like disciplining a teenager. What does it mean? Wherever you draw the line, they're gonna push back. Wherever you draw the line, they're gonna push back. No. So if you draw the line at a place which is not negotiable, mamish, so they're gonna push back on stuff which is not negotiable. So what do you do? Well, it's a very simple, very common tactic. But it's the age-old issue of negotiation, right? If I want to buy this book for $100, what am I going to tell you? I'm going to tell you I'm prepared to pay $100. I tell you I want it for $50. Now what? Now we negotiate. I'm prepared to go up to 100, but if I tell you 100, then you're going to ask me for more, right? You're prepared to sell it for 150. You're going to tell me 150? You're not going to tell me 150 because we have to negotiate. So you tell me 200. So I say 50, you say 200, we meet somewhere in between. The idea here is not that the person should settle. The idea, the wisdom over here is that the person should understand that at every step of the way there's a battle. Even, I'm saying, we're not saying Klipas Noiga is a safe zone. It's not. But Klipas Noiga is the healthy battleground for a Yid. Mikol Mokoim, says the Alter Rebbe, nevertheless, even Klipas Noiga, which, for example, if a Jew eats food which is Klipas Noiga, can be elevated to Kedusha relatively easy and relatively quickly, but Koidem Shechayzer Kedusha, but before it goes up to, before he elevates it to Kedusha, make no mistake, Husitra Achro Klipa. If the person eats food, permissible food, not L'Shem Shemaim, the person says something, whatever the case may be, a Jew does. Now, I want to give you my own mashal for this. Let me read a few lines. Nevertheless, before it goes back up to Kedusha, Husitra Achro Klipa, but Gam Achar Kach, and even afterwards, even after he's elevated to Kedusha, the truth is, if it's food, Harushimu Memena Neshadav Baguf, there does remain a reshimu. Reshimu is a trace of the food that the person ate. If at the time that they ate it, they didn't eat it l'shem shemayim, even though it was permissible, but since at the time they didn't eat l'shem shemayim, so it's shkol shlipas admeis. There's residue. There's the reshimu. There's an imprint. Nishadov b'guf remains stuck to the body. Why? Liyos ki mikol ma'achol mashken asetek damu basam b'psorei. The reason, says the Alter Rebbe, why the example of food is so important is because when you eat food, what happens is as soon as you eat it, it becomes physically part of you. Therefore, if a person ate even taka, only kosher food, but they didn't eat it always l'shem shemayim, so there's a special process called chibut hakever, which the body goes through after 120, l'nakoisei u'letaharoi, to cleanse and to purify the body, mitum osei shekibel, from any impurity stuck to the body that it received, ba'noas olam hazer v'tanugav, in enjoying, in indulging in the physical, earthly pleasures of this world, if it wasn't done l'shem shemayim, miklipas noiga v'sheid nidon, even if it was permissible. Elohim came, Mishaloi Nenem Elam Haza Kol Yom of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Unless the Alter Rebbe says that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, said, before he died, the Gemara says he raised his 10 fingers to heaven, and he says, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi was an incredibly wealthy man, and there was nothing ever missing from his table, from his house, etc. He was a man of tremendous affluence, Baruch Hashem. Right before he died, he says he raised his hands to Rabbeinu Shalom, and with not even one out of my 10 fingers, I derived no selfish pleasure from this world, nothing for the sake of myself. It was all L'shem Shemayim. Okay, so then his body exists in a state of complete purity. But for the rest of us, the Alter Rebbe is saying, be mindful. Even when one engages in permissible pleasures, it must be done consciously, L'shem Shemayim. Otherwise, even the klipas noiga of it leaves an imprint. Or dvarim b'telim. Dvarim b'telim means idle talk without any teichen, without any content, talk just without any significance. But it's better, it's permissible. The person is ignorant, doesn't have the ability to study Torah, so but there's nothing else for him to talk about. What do you want from him? Even so, that's klipas noiga. But nevertheless, tzarich letar nafshoy mituma zu de klipa zu. So the body doesn't need any cleansing because you're not consuming anything physical, but the soul needs, for dvarim b'telim, the soul would need a special purification, again, from this klipas noiga, even though it's relatively easy to cleanse oneself, to elevate oneself in a spiritual sense, but nevertheless, it in the meanwhile, it leaves an imprint. It leaves an imprint. I'll give you an example. Sometimes you say something to somebody and you offend them, right? You don't necessarily mean to offend them. You didn't even realize you were offending them. You said something, maybe you were joking, maybe you weren't joking, maybe you didn't, this person was sensitive about this, etc. But the person got offended. So now what? So now you say, but I didn't mean anything, but I didn't, it's all true, right? And because you didn't mean it, you can even relatively quickly, you can fix the relationship, right? You can fix the damage. But the bottom line is, a person who was offended was hurt. Person was hurt. So yes, we can move on, and yes, we can ignore, and yes, we can, etc., etc. But ultimately, deep down, if you offended me, I carry this. If I offended you, so you carry it somewhere in your heart. It's like, you know what, this is a little bit of a burden. So, in Alter was saying, in a ruchnistic sense, this is true. The neshama engages in klipas noiga. The neshama engages in klipas noiga. There's going to be a lasting imprint. And at some point in the world of truth, in the world where we no longer lie, this needs to be dealt with. We have some unresolved issues here, right? This needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with properly. And the dealing with it is not pleasant because, as you sort of dig deeper, you always discover deeper and more layers. Okay, here's my mashal and we'll call it a day. So my mashal for this is like this. You have a person who's running a business, right? A person running a business, he's got employees, he's got customers, he's got vendors, he's got orders, invoices, tutzach, all over the place. Okay. Now the question is, what is the person's driving motivation, the CEO? What does he want? What does he want here? So sometimes the CEO says, I want to run a successful, every CEO wants to run a successful business. The question is, how do you define a successful business? So some people will tell you, listen, I don't need to be a millionaire. I don't need to do that. I need that the business should make a profit. I need, number one, to support that the business should be in the black, right? I have to pay my bills, I have to pay my employees, etc. I need to make a profit so I can come home and I can support my family, and that's it. That's what I need. If the business is big enough, then Be'ezus Hashem, it works. Okay. You come to the guy, he's making $500,000 a year, and you tell him, listen, you're not running your business professionally enough. There's all sorts of, loose ends. The employees don't come on time. The place is not clean. There's all sorts of, just not professional, not tied up loose ends all over the place. In a moment of honesty, the guy may tell you, look, I don't really care. This employee comes a little late. That employee is a little, this one doesn't really do his job. This one, I really should fire him, but I can't get around to it. And then I have to replace him. I don't want to deal with it. It's a little, a little unprofessional, a little shlamazeldik v'mezakt, like a chsidish malava malka. At some point, the person may tell you, listen, it's good enough. I don't care. I have to sit here and make myself crazy and invest a tremendous amount of time and effort. It's a good. It's a good means. It's good. It's good enough as it is. Leave it alone. But if you don't deal with this, eventually one day all these problems can escalate. Okay, if they escalate, we'll deal with it then. Now leave me alone. I want peace of mind, right? I want the business runs, it's good. But say that it can run this way for years, sometimes decades. Say, leave me alone, it's fine. Sometimes a person will say, no. my mission statement here is that this business should make a killing. No, if you wanted to make a killing in that case, you got to sit there and you got to polish that business. You got to tie up every loose end. You got to go and you got to scale it, and you got to invest yourself and 18, 19, 20 hours a day, sometimes more. In other words, sometimes it's enough. You tell me the business, there's all sorts of problems with your business. It's collapsing? No, it's not collapsing. Then it's beside it's not collapsing. Who cares if it's not collapsing? That's not the standard. That's not the bar. The bar of the business shouldn't collapse. The bar is that the business should succeed. Should succeed big. For that you need to worry about the smaller stuff too. In a ruchnistic sense, that's Alter saying here a similar idea. Alter saying, come to you to tell them, listen, Sholosh klipas atmeya is asurim ukshurim is bound in klipa forever. Klipas noiga you could do tshuva, right? It's like saying the business functions. Okay, a Jew says if it functions, it's good enough. Alter says, yeah, but you're a yid. But you're a yid. As a yid, you're not designed. We're not designed for mediocrity, not physical mediocrity and not spiritual mediocrity. So for a regular person to live a middle class lifestyle, gesundheit. I come, I have what I need, I have a roof over my head, I have a pair of clothes, a little bed, a little beside there. But for a prince, for a king, to live a mediocre lifestyle, that's Gehenna. It's Gehenna. It's a living Gehenna. What do you mean? I'm royalty. I'm royalty. You know who I am. So because the Yid is a Yid, for a goy, as long as you stay away from Shalosh Klipas Atmeis, it's enough, Beseder. But for a Yid, says the Alter Rebbe, for a Yid, even Klipas Noiga is impure, and it leaves, and it's inappropriate, and it's ugh. So what happens then? So the Jew needs to be cleansed, right? The Jew needs to be purified. So the Alter Rebbe says here, there's something called kafakela, right? Kafakela, there's something called chibut hakeva. I'm intentionally not getting into what the specifics of these things are. But the idea of it in a spiritual sense is that the person realizes, the Bali Musar like to say, I'll conclude with this word, the Bali Musar like to say that Gan Eden and Gehenna is exactly the same thing. So that's how moirdike word. Gan Eden and Gehenna is exactly the same thing. What is it? After 120, we go upstairs and they show us a movie of what our life would have been like if we would have lived up to our potential. That's it. This is what could have been. That's it. Now, what is that? Gan Eden, no Gehenna. The answer is it depends. It depends on the eyes of the beholder. If our whole life we didn't want to self-discipline and we didn't want to work on ourselves, then we have to live with the pain of regret. And then you watch what could have happened, and it kills you. Look at that. I wasted time. I wasted my resources. I could have. I should have. I would have. I had the ability to. On the other hand, if a person utilized it, if a person utilized the resources and they owned their identity, then when you see this after 120, the person goes, yeah, that's me. Then it's not painful. It's self-assuring, it's self-fulfilling. So the idea of this cleansing process of the neshama and the guf after 120 is for the neshama and the guf to come face to face with their own true identity. Right? How do you heal the prince who thinks that he's a chicken? You have to somehow show him that he's really a human being, and then he's incredibly embarrassed of the fact that he acted like a chicken. But in that case, the shame is the healthy part. A human being who acts like a chicken should be ashamed of themselves. That's not unhealthy, that's healthy. The unhealthy part is the fact that he acted like a chicken. But once he acted like a chicken, the shame is the healthy part. If I care, that's how he heals to make sure he never does this again. So the Yidu is a chelik alakami mal mamash, and the Yidu belongs to the realm of Kedusha. For the Yid, even klipas noiga is tuma and a cleansing process is necessary. And this, for this, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not mevater. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't let go on any Yid, on any neshama that experienced anything, even the tiniest of spiritual infractions. Hashem says, no, I'm not letting go. The neshama will be restored to a state of complete perfection, because that's where it started. And to settle on anything less, that would be the ultimate travesty. That would be the ultimate pain for the neshama to say, listen, for you, mediocrity is good enough. Chas v'shalom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is never prepared to accept mediocrity on the part of a Yid. And therefore, neither should we. Have a wonderful week. We will continue Be'ezus Hashem next week, Wednesday morning.